Greetings, fellow humans, and welcome to the book Wormhole. Today's video is all about accountability and about holding myself accountable for everything I told myself I was going to do this past year. As the title says, I am going to answer the question of, did I read my TBR? I don't set TBRs for every month. I've only really set TBRs for months in which I am participating in readathons. So I only have 3 TBRs I'm going to explore in this video and see if I actually did read what I said I would. And then I also included books that I mentioned I wanted to read this year in my mid-year freakout video. And I'm also going to include the Never Have I Ever authors I did in a video a few months ago. So this is just an idea to see of what I actually did accomplish this past year. So actually, the first TBR I am looking at is my June TBR, which I didn't do a specific readathon for June, but for June I like to read LGBT books by LGBT authors. That's something I did last year as well, and that's something I think I'm always going to do for the month of June. So these are all just books that qualify for LGBT stories by LGBT authors. The first on my list was Dreams Bigger Than Heartbreak by Charlie Jane Anders. Did I read this book? Yes, I did in June. And I'm actually really excited for the third and final book in this series. I've already pre-ordered it, so you can count on me reading it next year. Next on my list was The Eighth Key by Laura Weir. Did I read this book? I did. Next on my list was The Martian Child by David Gerald. Did I read this book? I did. So far, so good. Next is The Future of Another Timeline by Annalee Newitz. I did not read this in June, and I still haven't read it, and you're also gonna see this book crop up a few more times in this video. Escape and Exodus by Nikki Drayden. Did not read this book. Whoops. I mean, I tend to put a lot more on my TBR than what I'm actually going to read. So a lot of times it's like I just didn't get around to it, and that is definitely the case for these past 2 books. Next book on this list was Babel 17 by Samuel R. Delany. I did not read this book, and I have not read it yet. And the main reason I didn't end up reading this for June is just because I wasn't able to get my hands on it until near the end of the month, and I think I just ran out of time. I came in too late. Time Bomb by R.M. Olson. This is book 3 in the Ungovernable series. Did not read this, have not read it yet. The Curse is Light by Johara Harper. I did read this book in June, and I do look forward to reading the second book and final book in the duology. When We Were Magic by Sarah Gailey. I did read this book this month. Unity by Ellie Bangs. Did not read this one this past month. Wasn't able to get my hands on a copy of it. Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. Did not read this one this month. Keyword this month. A Complicated Love Story Set in Space by Sean David Hutchinson. Did not read it this month or at all yet. A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine. I did read this book in June, and I also read the sequel, A Desolation Called Peace, this month as well. You Sexy Thing by Kat Rambo. I did read this in June. By Your Side, The First 100 Years of Yuri and Manga by Erica Friedman. I started reading this one in June, but yeah, I haven't finished it yet. Queer Ducks and Other Animals, The Natural World of Animal Sexuality by Elliot Schrafer. I did not read this one, and I have not read it yet. This was another book I just couldn't get. My last one for this TBR was Queerbaiting and Fandom, Teasing Fans Through Homoerotic Possibilities by Joseph Brennan. This was yet another one that I wasn't able to get. Okay, so then I'm going to go on to my July TBR, which I participated in the Summer Splash Readathon. But did I read my TBR for July? First prompt of the month was Surf's Up, read a book with a body of water on the cover. I had We Shall Sing a Song Into the Deep by Andrew Kelly Stewart, and I did read this book in July. Next was Roots, Read a Childhood Favorite, and I put a few different ones for this one. First, I put The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, The City of Ember by Jean Duprow, and Animorphs by K.A. Applegate, and I read none of those this month. Whoops. City of Ember is like, has such a like sentimental place in my heart, but I'm kind of afraid to reread this book. Because I have a feeling I might not like it as an adult. Heat Waves, read a book set entirely in summer. For this I had Book Lovers by Emily Henry, and I read about 75% of this book in July, but I did not finish it in July. Easy Breezy, read a book that is under 200 pages. I had Sun Daughters, Sea Daughters by Ame Ogden, and The Past is Red by Catherine Valente. I read neither of these in July, but I did end up reading The Past is Red, I think in August? I did end up reading this book this year, just not in July. Sunny Days, read a book with yellow on the cover. I chose The Actual Star by Monica Byrne for this one, and I had started reading this book, I think, I don't remember what month, but before July, so that's why I put it on this TBR, because I wanted to finish it. And I didn't end up finishing this book until I think it was August as well. Pride, read a book with a queer main character or by a queer author. I did both for that category. Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe, and I did read this book in July. Branch Out, read from a genre you don't usually read. For this one, I chose The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, because I don't read a lot of contemporary YA, and I did read this book in July. Hot Girl Summer, read a book written by a woman. I chose Siren Queen by Niveau. I didn't read this book in July, but obviously for this category, I definitely had some crossover with some of the other books I read, because like half of what I read is written by a woman. It's such an easy category to cross off. Spice It Up, read a book by an author of color. I had Riot Baby by Tochi Onyebuchi, and I did read this book in July. Summer Vacation, read a translated work. I had two books for this category. Solaris by Stanislaw Lem. Did not read this book. Could not get it actually from a library. And then I had The Three Body Problem by Chi-Shin Liu, which I did read in July. Sandcastle, read a book featuring royalty. For this one I had Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. And I finally did read this in July. And I also had The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. This was another book that I had started earlier in the year, and I got to 60% in, and I was kind of hoping to finish it for July, but then I kind of decided to like DNF it. It's the only book I've DNF'd this year, because again, I got 60% in. It's a long book, and that 60% I had read, I didn't really enjoy. I was kind of like wanting to finish it out of stubbornness. I have a rule for myself that I will not review any book that I don't finish. So I kind of wanted to finish it just so I could like complain about what I didn't like about the book. But I ended up deciding like my time is better spent reading books I actually like, so I just DNF'd it. And then the last category for the Summer Splash Readathon was Share the Love, read someone else's favorite book. I had 3 different books for this category. Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio, and Angel Fall by Susan E. I didn't read any of them. And I didn't complete that category either, even though it's such a good category idea for a readathon. Okay, the last readathon I participated in this year, and I also hosted this one, was for October, the Monster High readathon. I had for the category of Plant Monster, which was Nature/Plants Presents, Hot House by Brian W. Aldiss. I did not read this book, and this was specifically because I could not get a hold of this book. I think it's out of print, so that one's going to be hard for me to find. For Pollen of Persuasion, a story calling for social change, I had Woman on the Edge of Time by Marge Piercy. I started reading this book within the last few days of October, and I didn't finish it until like November 10th, I think. For The Prompt, Ghoul Friends Forever, a book with female friendship, I had Ghoul Friends Forever, the Monster High tie-in novel, and I did read this book. For Scare City of Frights, a book taking place abroad / not the US. A Master of Jinn by P. Jelly Clark. This is a book I started reading in March and I was hoping to finish in October, but I didn't read it. I'm still at the same place I was back in March, so this might be a DNF. For Hall Monitor, A Lawful Good Character, I had Sybil Sue Blue by Rosa George Brown, and I did read this in October. Friday Night Frights, Transfer Student, a character who switches sides, I had Hooked by A.C. Wise, but I did read this in October. Hezekiah, A Book with Family, I had Book Lovers by Emily Henry again, and I did finish it this month, even though there was only like 25% of the book I needed to finish. But I did finally finish it, so yay! Steampunk, A Book with a Historical Setting, I had 2 different books for this one, Ring Shouts by P. Jelly Clark, and Kindred by Octavia Butler. I didn't read Kindred, I did read Ring Shout. Skulltimate Roller Maze, an empowering feminist read. I had The Future of Another Timeline by Annalee Newitz yet again, and I did not read it in October either. Okay, Freaky Fusion, a book that is a hybrid of 2 or more genres. Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, and I finally read this book in October. Rainbow, a book with LGBT rep. Had Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry, and I did read this in October. Freaky Flaw, a character with a tragic past. Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. I did read this in October. Day of the Dead, a book about death. I have yet again The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, just because every October I think about rereading this book, but also because it's a reread. I don't tend to prioritize rereads. I don't do a lot of rereads. Because there's so many new books I need to read. So yeah, that's definitely why I didn't end up reading this in October, but it'll probably crop up every single October TBR for the rest of my life. For Killer Style, fashion / clothes play an important role in the book. I doubled up on Ghoul Friends Forever for that category, and like I said, I did read this one. And lastly, for my October TBR, for Scaritage, a chosen one main character, I had Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert, and I did read this book in October. Alright, next I'm going to talk about the books I said I wanted to read before the year ends in my mid-year freakout video. So for the prompt, new release I haven't read yet but want to, I had Siren Queen by Niveau yet again. And like I said, I haven't read this book yet. And I also had Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry, which makes me so happy looking back on this that I talked about this in my mid-year freakout, and I did end up reading it before the year ended, as well as Our Lady of Mysterious Ailments by T.L. Huchu, and I did read it. And for the prompt, most anticipated release for the second half of the year, I put A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers. This one I knew 100% I was gonna read this year because I absolutely love Becky Chambers' work and I love this series. So yeah, I read it the same month it came out pretty much. And then I also put for most anticipated release, Hooked by A.C. Wise, which I did say earlier, I did read this book this year. And then for the category, what do I want to read before 2020 ends? I had Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, which I did read in October. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I put this on the list for this specific video because I had planned on reading it for a certain readathon that I didn't end up doing, and I think the readathon actually didn't end up happening. So yeah, I didn't end up reading it. And then I also had Sybil Sue Blue by Rosa George Brown, which I knew I wanted to, which actually I had this for the same readathon I talked about for the previous book. But even though that readathon didn't happen, I put it on my Monster High TBR. It worked for that readathon, and I did read it. And then I had Kindred by Octavia Butler yet again, because I knew I wanted to read it for a readathon, but I didn't end up choosing it for said readathon. And then I also mentioned some series I had wanted to continue this year. So I had Rogue Protocol by Martha Wells, which is book 3, and the Murderbot series. Did not read it. Gemini by Amy Kaufman and J. Kristoff, which is book 2 in the Illumini Files series. Did not read it. And then A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green, which is book 2 in the Carl series. And guess what? I didn't read this one either. I clearly am not doing well with series this year, but I will say I read more of Dune. I read a little bit more of Animorphs this year. I'm not doing terrible. Okay, and the last thing I wanted to talk about was my Never Have I Ever authors. So let's get a little update of where I am on the sci-fi authors I've never read before. So for the classic, I had Isaac Asimov, still haven't read him. H.G. Wells, which I did read. I ended up reading The Time Machine, which I really enjoyed, and I plan on reading a lot more by him. I have a few different books by him on my TBR because I was so impressed with it. And then I had Octavia E. Butler, which I am going to have to put down another finger for because I did end up reading her this past year. I ended up reading Dawn, which actually someone on this video, I'm going to put a screenshot here of who it was, mentioned the Xenogenesis series in my comments, which I had never heard of before. And I looked it up because, you know, he was talking about it in the comments and I was like, oh my god, that sounds like exactly what I want to read. So I immediately went out and bought this book and I read it before any of the other books I have by Octavia Butler and I love it. I'm currently reading book 2 of this series. So thank you so much for turning me on to that series. And then I also had Samuel R. Delaney, still haven't read him yet, and William Gibson. That's another no. So I have at least 2. This is so fucking awkward for me to do this way. Why did I do this to myself? So I have 2 authors I knocked off of that list. 3 more to read. And I might do another 5 for next year. And then I also did a Never Have I Ever for modern sci-fi authors. So for this one I had Jeff Vandermeer, still haven't read him. Adrian Tchaikovsky, still haven't read him. Andy Weir, nope, didn't read them either. And N.K. Jemisin, another nope. And then Catherine Valente, I did read. As I said earlier in this video, I read The Past is Red. Forgot what it was called. That is enough about my TBRs. I did quite a bit, honestly. Let me know how you did this year with your TBRs, if you follow them, if you don't. I look forward to giving myself even more goals for next year and holding myself accountable for them. Alright, thanks for watching this video. Remember to support your local library and shop independent when you can. And until next time, please stay tuned.